back, everybody, to WWTA News. So, welcome back. Hey, look, man, we just gonna have a little talk today about the craziness, the madness, and I'm gonna share some thoughts and ideas. I know a lot of you people might think I'm just some weird guy that just is crazy and talking, like he probably doesn't know what he's talking about. I probably don't. You know what I'm saying? I just tend to do a lot of reading and keeping abreast of what's going on. And that's why I read stuff to you people. Maybe you people read, maybe you people don't. I don't know. But I'm just going to read some things, and then I'm going to talk about it and share my thoughts and opinions because that's it. There's nothing else there. I'm nobody. All right, so NBC News, right? They've got an article that says New York Community Bank to buy failed Signature Bank. New York Community Bank to buy failed Signature Bank. It's a common theme happening. This is as of March 19th by the Associated Press. New York Community Bank has agreed to buy a significant chunk of the failed Signature Bank in a $2.7 billion deal. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corp said that late Sunday. The 40 branches of Signature Bank will become Flagstar Bank starting Monday. Flagstar is one of New York Community Bank's subsidiaries. The deal will include the purchase of $38.4 billion in Signature Bank's assets. That's a little more than a third of Signature's total when the bank failed a week ago. 40 branches of the Signature Bank will become Flagstar Bank, right? 40 branches, 40 locations, 40 buildings, right? This is interesting. It's really interesting because this is a buyout from a failure. And usually, to me, directly, it feels like, not so much feels like, it sounds like and looks like, look like a duck, quack like a duck, right? Looks like the big fish are consuming the small fish. I couldn't even begin to fathom the reason. I could speculate, but it just looks here like, for some reason, this failure is bringing bigger businesses or bigger banks in to consume, right? The FDIC said $60 billion in Signature Bank's loans will remain in receivership and are expected to be sold off in time. Important. I've talked about this many times, and I know a lot of you may think I'm some crazy person just talking. It's no problem. It doesn't bother me a bit. But I've talked about numerous times that the Fed would come in and do this thing where they would buy the bank loans, right? At this point in time, they were calling it bailouts. They've even called it quantitative easing. Whatever they choose to call it, it all comes back to this: buying the bank's loans. They'll restructure, make new agreements, combine a bunch of loans into one. It becomes this big contract where all these loans are being held. You have a period of time to pay this loan off. That loan immediately makes the bank liquid. This happened, and a lot of banks were unable to fulfill the contract. So it brought us to this point where, hey, you can't pay the bill. You're falling into a position where we're going to have to just come in and take ownership. And I kind of really it really appears that this is strategic. You know what I'm saying? And of course, you can stumble off into conspiracy, so on and so forth. But I'm just looking at these things, and I've been watching these things happen for years. And it just look like a duck, quack like a duck. You know what I'm saying? It goes on to say, Signature Bank was the second bank to fail in this banking crisis, roughly 48 hours after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. Signature, based in New York, was a large commercial lender in the tri-state area, but had in recent years gotten into cryptocurrencies as a potential growth of business. Now, one could speculate and say, oh, well, that would have caused the failure. But let's backtrack to where it says Signature, based in New York, was a large commercial lender. Now let's just forget about the crypto side of this and let's look at the commercial side. Businesses, right? Corps, businesses, yada yada. We've gone through a period through that COVID, well, situation, which caused a lot of different things to initially come to a halt. At the same time, well, this was happening around about the time as these banks were getting their bailouts and contracts being made with the Fed, who was providing liquidity. So coming through that phase, you then move into a phase of a crisis that hit all nations, quote unquote. And during that situation, businesses began to fail. Businesses began to close. Businesses could not pay their debts. Who were holding a lot of these commercial debts? Places like Signature. Coincidental, I'd say. I would, we're not going to conspire or like we're just going to just look like a duck, quack like a duck, right? So, a lot of these things were happening, right? So, as a commercial lender, those bank loans, right, were being bundled up and sold or put into a contract for a loan, in which case Signature, like other banks that we'll find out about in the coming future, because these aren't the only banks to go down, a lot of banks are going to go down, were putting, whether it be commercial or the retail market, those loans into these contracts so that they could then get that money being loaned, bailouts, overnight bailouts, quantitative easing. Those things were happening so they could be made liquid so they could continue to do business the next day. Because the next day after the crisis, people still needed to run businesses, right? Commercial loans. They still needed to grow, and it's going to be found out as well. The same thing happened with the retail market. So in order for the banks to be able to continue to do loans or lend, they had to go through this, right? So the FDIC said $60 billion in Signature Bank's loans will remain in receivership and are expected to be sold off in time, right? And these will be bonds, right, that'll be sold, which Gary Gensler some months ago told us, hey, yeah, go ahead and invest in bonds. We got this. Get some of these bonds that we have, right? They'll become bonds and probably secure bonds because now the government's holding them and they're going to get paid. And again, I've told you before, I didn't keep secret that when I failed to pay in a timely fashion a debt, my whole check was garnished. Didn't leave me a penny until that debt was paid. That's all I'm going to say on that. We're going to move along. After Silicon Valley Bank failed, depositors became nervous about Signature Bank's health due to its high amount of uninsured deposits, as well as its exposure to crypto and other tech-focused lending, right? These deposits are uninsured. The FDIC isn't backing them. They're not insured for the $250K, right? And plus there's exposure, right? Plus there's exposure to crypto and other tech-focused lending, right? Technology. Technology doesn't have to mean crypto. By the time it was closed by regulators, Signature was the third largest bank failure in U.S. history. The FDIC says it expects Signature Bank's failure to cost the Deposit Insurance Fund $2.5 billion, But that figure may change as the regulator sells off assets. The deposit insurance fund is paid for by assessments on banks, and taxpayers do not bear the direct cost. The direct cost when a bank fails. Direct. Doesn't say that you don't at all. It just says you don't bear the direct cost, right? It's paid for by the assessments on banks, right? So more loans will be taken out. And we all know as taxpayers, we do fund the federal government, but it appears that they were smart enough to sign these contracts. So the government does essentially have these bonds. And these bonds are going to be commercial debt, and they're going to be retail debt. So we're not only paying taxes, but we're paying these bonds back, whether we know it or not, back to the government anyway. But, you know, there's 2.5 billion that had to be dealt with, and the regulator, right? We can only assume at this point, not even assume, who's the regulator, right? This is going to be back to the government or to the Fed. These are the ones dealing with the regulation. All right, so we'll close with that. If you got any thoughts, ideas, or comments, feel free to share them. It's always welcome. And I'll catch you all in the next episode.